Hi, everybody. How are you? You doing well?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Okay. We're here in Brookline, Massachusetts, and we're going to be talking about two very short poems by Larry Eigner. And they were both written in Swampscott, Massachusetts, not far from here. This is roughly a Boston-related ModPo video. Eichner lived in Swampscott with his parents for many years until he moved to San Francisco. So these are both Swampscott poems. All right, so I'm going to read the two poems, and then we're going to take one at a time and see what happens, okay? All right, so first, he, like Emily Dickinson, he didn't title his poems. She titled a few of her poems, but mostly not. He just wrote the poems, and we know them by their first lines. The first one is called "A Structured Field Is." A structured field is the mind, light, and the view with whatever eyes. And then headlights in the sky. Headlights in the sky, tail spot on a cloud. There are invisible beams. Somebody's jobs steady wherever. Gosh, I love those. Okay. I think we should start with the structured field is. It's a little more abstract than the other. So I'm going to ask some folks to take responsibility. I wonder if Gail and Susan would take the first line, "A structured field is." Actually, I think Gail and Susan, you should take "A structured field." Are you okay with that? Hearing no dissent. Okay. All right, great. Edith, will you take the verb "is" there?
Yes.
I don't think that's really so hard, but maybe it is. Okay. Naomi, Nancy, Helen, good friends. The three of you have the mind.
That's dangerous.
Yeah. What's so dangerous about it?
It's the fun side of dangerous.
The fun side of dangerous. So that's Naomi, Nancy, and Helen. Okay. And Edith has is. Okay. All right. So Melissa, Zahle, and Lisa, will you take the next two lines? Light and the view. Yeah? Lisa, Melissa. Okay. All right. Jody, Anna, and Scott, you have the most beautiful line, "with whatever eyes." So Jody, Scott, and who was the third? Anna, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's see what happens. A structured field. Gail, Susan, can you make quick work of that?
I'm thinking of a field of view, a field of looking out.
You mean a field as seen?
As seeing.
Oh, field as in field of view.
Field of view, right.
Interesting.
What he's
Why
seeing.
structured? Oh, because field of view is by definition bounded. Is that what you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Susan?
Yeah. So, and
Sorry, Gail.
also
Susan just gave us.
a literal field, a green field, a hay field, a field of green. But
So in other words, if you have a field that's been planted, there is a visual structure to it, right? There's rows, and there's spaces between the rows, and if it's weeded, the spaces between the rows are clear, people walk on them.
and also I think of it as maybe it's colored by the words that come after, but that in our consciousness it's a field, and it has structure to it the way we perceive. We don't perceive like a horse would or a cat would, so that
We meaning human beings.
yeah, human beings. So our consciousness is a structured field in some ways.
So there are a lot of Eigner wrote thousands of poems. They have been recently collected in 4 volumes, and they were printed the way we're seeing it here. They were printed in non-proportional Courier font, which reproduced the typewriting as best as possible. So this is not actually a manuscript, typescript. This is the attempt by the editors, who were friends of Eigner's, to put together pages more or less the way his typewritten pages would appear. That was, and the other thing I'll say about him is that being confined to a wheelchair, which is an understatement, really confined, he certainly got out, but not as often as he would like. So he spent a lot of time looking out the window. Like a lot of window poets. Anybody want to name a poet who's always looking out a window?
Zahle.
James Schuyler, because he had a lot of his own health issues, so he was looking out a window in New York City. Keats got out a lot, but he liked to look at the casement. There are a lot of casement poems.
Walden, not a window but a door.
Yeah, it's a little ironic about Walden being looking out a window a text, since he was supposed to be outside more. But okay. All right, but
Russian poet
Pasternak.
very much
Yes, and of course, given the Russian weather, everybody is everybody's a window poet. Okay, but
to the being inside. Yeah.
But Gail, one more thing then. So let's read structured field again, based on the idea that it might be seen from a window. Does that change anything or help?
Well, it gives it, the window gives it boundaries. You can only see part of it.
That's right. Okay.
Or structured
So
with
that's
panes of
With
glass.
panes, right?
Panes of the glass.
Glass may be a little wavy, so it
Good.
changes it.
Anybody know painting or literary history, poetic history, and the word field is very big and important. Anybody want to try that? Melissa, you seem to want to say something.
I'm thinking of Berger, but it's like what you said, field of view. I'm very interested in what you said about consciousness, because I think it gets at an inner and outer consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think of philosophers and writers who wrote about perception itself. You could even say Ashbery, in a sense, was.
Yes, that's a great response to my question. I'm thinking of the concept of the page as a field, right? Charles Olson, who was absolutely somebody that Eigner was very interested in, and also a Massachusetts person. So field, and then of course you have painting of the time, abstract painting, which used the canvas as a field. So in other words, field need not be a planted row of wheat or corn. It could be field in a more abstract sense. Okay, Edith, a structured field is?
Is. Is we're in the present.
Yep,
It's the only verb.
it's the only verb in the poem.
It creates a definition so that the first line is saying this is this. There's an equation.
And this is one of the moments where you're happy to be reading a poem, because most speech doesn't say things like, a structured field is, there's a kind of crazy generalizing happening in that.
Didactic.
Nobody would come up and say something that didactic unless they were in a poem and probably intending to be ironic.
Huh.
Anything you want to, I'm not saying that this is an ironic poem, but if I were to come up to you and say, Helen, a structured field is, and then gave you an answer, you would think, who the hell is this guy?
Are you doing it right? Because it's also, I didn't find it.
Yes.
I'm still confused by structured field. We talked about it, but it still doesn't mean anything to me.
I mean, it's going to
So
continue to be.
he's setting you up with something that's unclear and then
Right.
saying is.
Is.
So he's going to create a pathway for you.
Okay. Naomi, Nancy, Helen.
Girls.
Women.
The mind.
Well, he's telling you in a sense then what the structured field is. So here is what it is the mind.
And how could the structured field be a mind? How?
Well, we don't know yet, but
I think Nancy does know.
What I think is the mind is parenthetical. It just almost needed to be something to connect is in light.
Oh, well.
You're skipping on to somebody else's word, but that's
I
okay.
know.
That's okay.
It's funny.
A structured field is the mind. Naomi?
The mind is a place of imagination, of thought, of words, of, I was going to say feeling. The mind is this, isn't it the grand central station of how we function in a way?
If somebody were to say this sentence to you and give you the option of replacing is with something else, you might say something else, and what would it be? A structured field is like the mind. A structured field is an imagining of the mind. Is that where you're going?
Possibly is like the mind.
But that's not what's being said.
No, so I mean, there's definition in.
What if we were to reverse the items, the objects? The mind is a structured field.
Right,
Right.
right.
Now, what would that mean, Helen?
Well, it's clearer.
It's clearer. That's
It's
a
lack
relief.
of clarity, but I mean, it's clear the mind is a structured field. Oh, like I could somehow get my thoughts around that if we said the mind is a structured field, because then I would understand, you know, how the thoughts work or whatever, and so.
Well, everything is going well because we're talking about conceptualization, but then we get light and the view, and that changes things. So we have Zahle and Lisa and Melissa who have thoughts on this. Who wants to start? Light and the view.
I feel quite constrained by a structured field is the mind. I feel locked down, and I so wish it were the mind is a structured field so that we could be liberated from that. I think that the long eyes of mind and light and view and sort of long eyes are liberating us in the middle of the poem. And the fact that light is at the exact middle of the poem, kind of like Dante's rose in paradise, makes me think that the mistake of the first few lines, a structured, I mean, there's something kind of ass backward about a structured field is the mind. The syntax is wrong.
Finish.
Yeah. No, please.
I feel differently about it, because
Okay.
if you don't have a structured mind is first, you don't have the outer view of the field that Gil mentioned, because he's addressing both inner and outer. And so if you say the mind is a structured field, you're in the mind, and it's essential to this poem that you have both the inner and the outer. And the thing with light is light, I agree with you, Lisa, about light being in the middle, but because those two lines start the way they do after the mind and you have light, he's rendering light. That word, I feel, is an experience of light in the mind and light in the outer field. And is there a difference between the light in the mind and the light in the other outer field?
I feel quite liberated by the light. I'm just
Right.
gonna say,
Right.
by the light on its line,
Right.
in its own line, by itself.
What's
And
the
that's all I have to
difference?
say.
What's the difference between observing or perceiving a field and having it thought of as a function of thinking, and on the other hand, observing or perceiving a structured field and having it relate to light and view? Is there a difference?
Structured is such an ugly word.
Yeah.
Structured is,
Yes.
But the light breaks it open, almost
Yeah,
like
no,
lightning.
I agree.
I mean, I'm just saying I agree with you
I
that
agree
light
with
is
you
effective.
too.
I think it's partly, yeah, I know we're being so polite.
I completely
but
agree with you.
But I think that light is more effective because of the word structure. That's what I'm
Yeah,
talking
no,
about.
I feel like there's tension created by the structured field that we.
Structured field seems like an art phrase. It seems like, I mean, I really, architecture,
Yeah.
I think abstract painting. But what is going on with this poet when he gets to light and the view is my question. I'm looking for a simple response to this change.
Freedom.
I think the light is the one thing that's outside the person.
Uh-huh.
So the person is dealing with this idea of field, and the mind is the person, and the view is the person, but the light is outside. The person can't do anything about the light. The light is given.
And of course, the light is making it possible to perceive what's
Exactly.
outside.
It's the outside
Yeah.
parameter.
And the view?
The view.
With whatever eyes.
Yeah, the view
Zahle?
the view is sensory information and limited by a border, by the condition. And I would think light is both outside, because without light you would not see the view. And it's both inside too. It's the mind that has light. The conscious has light. Otherwise you wouldn't really you won't have perception. So any outside you have to go through the mind. You build a model, and that conscious model is the structure. Right structure is you're building a model of the world.
Thank you. What I'm going to do now is read the whole poem with the last line and ask Jody, Anna, and Scott to comment briefly on the last line. We particularly need to understand the use of the word whatever. A structured field is the mind, light, and the view with whatever eyes. Jody?
So what struck me about the last line is the ambiguity of the last two words. Because eyes typically think of that as a noun grammatically, which would mean whatever is like an adjective, like, oh, whatever. Like,
What would that possibly mean?
yeah.
Which eyes? Whatever eyes.
Yeah, and there's this kind of lackadaisical connotation. to that.
Imprecision,
Yeah.
possibly.
But then whatever could also be a pronoun, and eyes could also be a verb. And so and so like depending on your view. so to
Wow.
speak,
A
like
view
the-
with whatever eyes. Can we stick with the first reading for a little bit? Why would a poet use the word whatever in such a short poem, thinking it through intentionally? What does it do to eyes to make them whatever eyes?
I guess whatever has this sense of openness. So it as Lisa said earlier, the way the light opens up the poem for her, I think whatever kind of creates this sense of openness for the reader.
Anna?
I think it might mean that eyes are more than just the organs at the front of your face. That eyes, he's considering eyes as like the larger perceptive qualities of a person, that it's not just about like your seeing sense, it's about all the various ways that people perceive things.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have this structured field as being the mind, light, and the view, I think it's all about various qualities of perception, trying to fold all of those into this crazy structured field.
Scott, your thought on this?
Yeah, can I compare it to I Dwell in the House of Possibility?
If you like, yes, you're talking about Emily Dickinson.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and can I change whoever to whatever?
You mean whatever to whoever?
Whatever to whoever.
Yeah.
So it could be anyone's eyes.
Right.
The what he sees with the mind is equated. There's no difference between object and reality. So if anything, it's interpretation. Okay? Since we know that he's in a wheelchair, that's why I compared it to a possibility. Anything is specific in particular. Anything you look at is going to refer back to the mind. So itself. What I thought of was, Lisa, the lyric I. The speaker of the poem. Okay.
Right, the lyric I.
Yeah, the lyric
who
I.
is also via Emerson.
Yeah.
The I, the pronoun I.
I don't think it means.
E-Y-E-R.
I don't think he means eyes and I, the narrator.
Well, I think that I, the narrator, is there too.
Yeah, but it doesn't. It isn't really
Okay.
substantial. Okay. But yeah, I is for the person. Usually, you would put the narrator. You'd be
There's
heavy on.
there's a subjectivity that's excluded from this poem until perhaps the last
Oh, absolutely.
word.
Yeah,
With
more
whatever
than,
eyes, is
right.
it your eye, is
Yes.
it my eye?
right.
I feel it's the poet eyes and the reader listener's eyes. And in that way, there's this incredible intimacy that what the poet is viewing
Yeah.
and how he views his mind is what he's allowing the viewer to see and sense their own mind. So it's actually very intimate. It's almost a love poem.
Certainly, Eigner wrote often about the fact that what he was seeing was all he had. And so, as Lisa is following Scott's suggestion, as Lisa's pointing out, you can't help but think about subjectivity entering the poem with whatever eyes. Ultimately,
That's why I put in whoever.
yeah,
Because you've got the universal.
I think it's this. I think those are interchangeable
the mind
conceptually.
it isn't the universal
Yeah.
mind
Yeah,
of the transcendental
yeah, Yeah.
mind that can see everything.
Transparent eyeball.
Sure.
yeah. Yes, this is. There's a lot of Emerson in Eigner. So what he's saying here is, I see things, but he doesn't remind you that it's I who is doing the eyeing until the end, when he realizes that, gee, I've written a poem, and it's a poem that presents my view, and my eye, because I'm so otherwise limited, is created by the eyes. I'm going to read the second poem, and then this time it's going to be a free-for-all. We're not going to assign parts. Maybe make somewhat quick work of the first parts, but then when we get to somebody's jobs, steady wherever, I think we need to think about it. I'll read it again and then we'll talk. Headlights in the sky, tail spot on a cloud. There are invisible beams. Somebody's jobs, steady wherever. So the first 6 lines, they are, he read a lot of Williams. He was interested in the 2 parts of the triadic line. Couldn't quite get the tab to work very well. I see this first part as a setup. So let's talk about that first part. He's observing what he usually does. He loved rush hour. He loved watching. He loved watching out the window at the end of the day and taking notes. There are a lot of rush hour poems. But, so is it, let's just stipulate that it's a sunset. What do you see? What do you got there? Helen, what do you see? Headlights in the sky, just riff. What do you see?
I'm sorry. I thought they were airplanes. That's
That's
what
okay.
was
I
thinking.
bet they are.
I wasn't into. Yeah,
I bet
wasn't
they
into
are.
Cars at all. So that's what I saw.
Well, whose
was just
headlights? What are
lights,
headlights associated with?
Well, cars. For
Cars,
Sure.
I think that's a car,
But
right?
a tail spot on a cloud, and that's where I kind of went into the sky.
Yeah, I'm seeing a combination of
Okay.
headlights and sunset.
In the sky.
I'm seeing fog by the ocean. If he's in Swampscott, that, you know, when you're driving through the fog and there's these invisible jumping ahead, but in the sky where you can't tell, you know, just sort of this sheath of fog.
Yeah, that may be there. It's a little hard to see the word headlights and then beams and not keep thinking of
Yeah.
cars.
The cars, right?
Right.
If the car's
Right.
coming through
Oh.
fog, it's coming through clouds. So it's
Coming
kinda
through a
like
cloud. Yeah. Wow.
So it seems to be, if you take your hand and you cover over the last two lines, what kind of poem do we have? Anna, headlights in the sky, tail spot on a cloud, there are invisible beams. It's a William Carlos Williams poem, circa 1925 or something. Right? Or HD if she were into cars, which she would not have been. But
For lights, I mean, I think it's cars, it's electrification.
it's
You know, that goes into the sky, that
yeah.
there, it's not just cars.
No, it's not
It doesn't
just
seem, it feels almost like,
Right.
what are those lights that sweep the sky?
Skylights.
Projectors.
No, I think you're right.
Spotlights, it just feels like sodium lights, it just, there's a lot of different lights.
Eigner is a pastoral poet, always, because he's always looking out at what he sees in his neighborhood, especially when he was in this area, not so much when he was in San Francisco. But at the same time, as Lisa's suggesting, he's into busyness, electrification, and human activity, and how it relates to what he sees. So now let's add those last two lines. I'll read the whole, and then we'll get to the last two lines. Headlights in the sky, tail spot on a cloud. So you got the prepositions placing things, right? Headlights where, tail spot where. There are invisible beams. Somebody's jobs, that's a plural possessive. Somebody's jobs, steady, wherever. What's happening? Somebody's jobs.
I mean, so I don't know, but how I read this when I read this before was everyone's doing their job. Like some people are, you know, have something to do with the lights. Somebody else has to do with the tail spot. Someone's flashing the invisible beams. Somebody's job, steady wherever. They gave me when I read this before, such a feeling of, oh, good. Like everyone's doing what they need to do.
And he's got something to do too?
Yeah, steady wherever.
Steady, if it were just steady, that would be steady jobs. And everybody's got one, and maybe he's got a steady job too, which is to watch everybody else at the end of the day go home.
Is he only referencing himself though?
I don't know, but I'm just trying to lead us into an exercise where steady is the end, and steady jobs is a cliche. I wouldn't be happy at all if it were like that, but it would be clear somebody's job's steady. Okay, but then wherever, which does the same non-definition that we saw with the word whatever. So steady wherever
Well, I mean,
Makes it all
seems
steady.
to call into question how steady it all is.
I thought he was talking about no matter wherever he sees, and himself is steady.
Yes, he is the still point, observing all the human activity around him. That's a very beautiful observation. And is that a steady job? Well, by what you just said, Zahle, it is by definition a steady job, to be the pivot, to be at the center.
Does steady imply the steady watchfulness of the poet?
I think that's what we're saying. And then it's a nice pun on steady job, because a steady job is an employment with a salary, and Larry doesn't have that.
And so I'm wondering, so when I saw the phrase somebody's jobs, the plural possessive, I went to for occupation this, and I think the Larry Eigner
That's what I was
work.
thinking exactly.
But it's
Say more
plural.
about the Niedecker,
Yeah, so
right? She's self-employed.
Yep.
Right? Grandpa's saying, Lauren, you should have a skill because, and she's saying, oh, I have one. I'm doing it right now. Right here. I mean, Eigner and Niedecker are so closely connected. He has so much self-sufficiency for a guy who can use one finger on a typewriter and be confined to a wheelchair. There's so much self-sufficiency. That wherever, and even the somebodies, I think it's overstated, but it's bold.
And so I'm wondering if whereas in the previous two poems it's more of a solitary act, this seems to be more of a collective partnership, like between reader and writer perhaps.
Interesting.
I go back to invisible beings, because I don't know what an invisible being is. So I was trying to figure out, so I'm thinking that's the people. So what he's seeing are the lights, and he's seeing the movement. The invisible beings are the things that are making all of that happen, which are these people.
Let's talk about those people.
He doesn't see them, he doesn't know, but he's imagining, it's
Well,
like
he doesn't see them, he sees the beams they create.
Right, right.
Right? That's as close as he's going to
That's as
get.
close as he gets. So when somebody's jobs, he's trying to imagine what they're doing. He's trying to imagine who the people are behind the cars and the lights.
Yeah.
Steady wherever is like, he understands that people are going back and forth to work. You know, it's this steady thing that's happening. And then he's lost at whatever. It's like whatever. He's trying to get to them, but he can't get to them.
What is a tail spot? Like there's heads and
It's on a
tails.
fish. It's on a fish.
Nice. I didn't see that.
Oh,
I just assumed it was a sunset wisp, you know?
Yeah, but heads and tails.
Making heads and tails of something.
Well, I thought
Headlights versus tail
tail light.
spot.
That's what I
Yeah,
thought.
the
it
back,
was a
the
tail
back
light.
light versus front
tail
light.
lights.
Yeah, headlights.
Oh, you see it from the front and you see it from behind.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm such an idiot, of course.
Little tail.
Yes.
The cloud.
So we have headlights in the sky, so it combines the rush hour with what's happening to light in the sky. It's not at all about people going home. Then you have tail spot that has the same doubleness. And then the statement, which he loves to do, usually at the beginning of poems, but here it is, there are invisible beams. He makes the statement.
But it's also, there are all these compounds, headlights, tail spots, somebody's jobs.
Somebody's, yeah.
I don't know.
Invisible being.
To me, there is a sort of cloudiness, mistiness that's referenced. You know, the headlights. If it is, the sky is foggy. The cloud and the tail spot, and then it comes and then it goes. You can't see where it came from. You can't see where it's going. He doesn't know anything about the people. They just pass by him for a second.
That's right.
He doesn't know where they're coming from, where they're going.
Right.
So, you know, when it says there are invisible beams, I read it also as there are invisible beams, like in the sky on a cloud. There are invisible dreams, somebody's jobs. It's like that there are visible beams, and they have to do with somebody's jobs, whether it's the street lights or the car lights, people going home from work or whatever. So to me, that invisible with the structure of the two phrases before, had a double meaning, and it made it all sort of vague and, you know, you can't pin it down. It's sort of like the cars passing in the night. You can't.
In a minute, I'm going to invite a few of you to offer final thoughts on Eigner, but I just want to throw out one more thing before we get to that. Earlier, I said I used Williams. I referred to Williams pretty awkwardly in terms of the structure of the tabbing. It really is a two and three structure thing. I think Williams is in here. I also think Williams is in here in that he was the poet who liked to watch people go home, and he was. But the difference between Eigner and Williams makes me like Eigner a lot, which is, and the thing that always gives me the heebie-jeebies about Williams, which is that Williams he's very appetitious and aggressive. He wants to know what these people are up to. He might actually learn a lot about who's inside those cars. He's less interested in, shall we say, the structured field of things than he is in the human motivations of these commuters. And in the end, Eigner is interested in the art of it. He knows he's not going to get to know the motivations. He's never going to have a job like this. It's not something that's going to be part of his poetry. He's going to be seeing things from outside, and he's going to try to make an art of it. So ultimately, the jobs have to be somebody's jobs, and the steadiness of the jobs has to be whatever, wherever. That's sort of my take on the attitude. And I really respect the attitude because he's not trying to be somebody he's not. In a way that Larry Eigner also isn't. There's a certain self-sufficiency there. I want to invite a few final thoughts on Eichner, quick ones. Who's got a couple final thoughts? Sergey.
A structured field is. It just strikes a chord with me because in psychiatry there is a technical term, if you will, but it sounds ugly to me when I heard it first time.
Wait, a psychiatric technical term is going to be ugly? News! Headlines, everybody! Brace yourself!
When the doctors say, I want to restructure your cognition. And to me, it sounded very totalitarian, like restructuring someone's cognition.
Wait, it sounded totalitarian. I thought that's
But turns out it's just a technical, like a professional term for psychologists, for clinical psychologists, for clinical psychiatrists, to change the mind and their view, sick mind of the person into a healthy mind. So to me, this amazing. I don't know if the author of this poem ever did any psychiatry or not, or psychology, but it sounds very interesting in that regard. It sounds very kind of high level. And also, another interpretation could be physical field, like in physics, like magnetic field. It's always an association with the mind in terms of brain. Yeah. So it's actually an amazing poly meaning.
That's interesting. Thank you. Two more final thoughts. Who's got one?
So this is my first encounter with Eigner, and I'm interested in the idea of how the poet structures these poems, and with the last line of each one, I see that grammatical ambiguity where with whatever eyes. Eyes could be a noun or a verb, and in this one, steady wherever. Steady could be an adjective or a verb.
Yes, good. Interesting. Final thought. Melissa Silva, you get the final thought.
Just
no
want to
pressure
say,
or anything.
to riff on what Gail is saying, invisible, the non-visible. And here's this watcher, looking at what's not visible. And then we return to the first poem where he's dealing with what you see and what you perceive. And just to riff on what Jody said, the last eyes could be I', eyes. Us.
The eyes.
Yeah.
I like that. Thank you all for getting into Eigner together. Will you give yourself some snaps for having done such a good job?
Yes! That's right.